A very warm welcome to the annual ORF America and ORF Dinner. We'd like to begin tonight's program by inviting the president of ORF, Dr. Samir Saran, to give a few words of welcome.
Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to this annual dinner, which is hosted by Observer Research Foundation India, Observer Research Foundation America, and hopefully next year we'll have Observer Research Foundation Middle East joining the party as well. We have an office ready, and next year you will see the Middle East presence as well. So a very warm welcome from the ORF family to each one of you, and I hope this is an occasion for us to catch up, renew our friendships, make some new friends, and engage on some very interesting conversations that will follow post the very interesting panel Sharon, Dhruva, and others at ORF have lined up for us. At this stage, let me first acknowledge Lieutenant Governor of California, Eleni, Kounalakis, for being with us this evening. Thank you. You are no stranger to ORF. It was a pleasure to host you in Delhi a few years ago at the Raisina Dialogue, and thank you for joining us this evening. Let me also thank our Board of Advisors as well as our Board of ORF America for being with us this evening. Ebtesam Al-Ketbi, President of the Emirates Policy Center, Bildt, former Prime Minister of Sweden, Tadashi Maeda, Chairman of the Board of Japan Bank of International Cooperation, Marise, Payne, the former Foreign and Defense Minister of Australia, and of course, Mr. Sanjay Joshi, Chair of ORF India and Chair of ORF America. Let me also thank our partners from APRI, especially Lara, who's not here, but someone who's been working behind the scenes to make this happen. Yervan Zorian, who's the driving force of an initiative we launched earlier today, where we brought together the diasporas of India and Armenia in a room, and we are hoping for magic to happen. We saw a little bit of song and dance, but that's the Indian part of it. We are going to see some innovation and technology, the Armenian contribution to it. So we are going to make magic, and we launched this initiative this afternoon. And of course, thank you, Yervan, for your leadership. So let me acknowledge his presence in the room as well. This morning, we also had a longish conversation on the future of ORF. And where are we headed? Where are we coming from? What is it that we've been up to? Let me just confirm to all of you that there's never been a moment better for think tanking than now. And you don't have to thank Donald Trump for that. I think all over the world, people are making our lives more interesting, and research, academia, as well as policy conversations need to be far more intense, profound, reflective, empathetic, and considered in the days ahead. Our role is going to increase. It is more important. Each one of us will have to contribute to stability and to predictability, two words that elude us in the world today. And that is what we need to strive and deliver. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful colleagues at ORF. We are now about 250 in 5 different centers. And together over the last 1 year, we have produced more than 200 long-form publications, over 2,000 short essays. We have hosted 200 events in 40 countries. And we have built communities of approximately 6,000 folks who walk through our doors and 5 million folks who engaged with our content online. So my colleagues have really taken some of these most crucial conversations at this time to a vast number of people across geographies, and thank you to them as we end this year for their wonderful contribution. Many of them are in this room, but please do join me in applauding the work of the ORF faculty, who has been truly outstanding in the year gone. So, without further ado, let me turn the mic back to Sharon. After welcoming you all very warmly to this dinner and promising each one of you that we will have time to engage post this dinner, and certainly our young fellows who are here, I think there are eventually 20 reached because the US is not in the mood to give visas anymore. They want people to come without them. So Those who were coming with the visas are smaller in number for a reunion, but a very warm welcome to our alumni who have turned up, and we will meet tomorrow morning to continue this conversation. So enjoy your dinner, and thank you once again for joining us. Sharon, over to you.
Tonight, we're honored to have a number of distinguished speakers for a panel discussion titled The Year of Elections and Geopolitical Turmoil. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ebtesam Al-Ketbi, President, Emirates Policy Center, the UAE, Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Sweden, Eleni Kounalakis, Lieutenant Governor of California, Tadashi Maeda, Chairman of the Board, Japan Bank for International Cooperation, Marise Payne, former Foreign and Defense Minister, Australia, and Dhruva Jaishankar, Executive Director of ORF America. Dhruva, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is actually an important venue and perhaps an appropriate one to be discussing the future of the international order. For those of you who came in a little bit early and maybe were lingering in the hallways, this was a hotel where some of the early discussions on the formation of the United Nations took place. And you can find pictures sometimes taken in these rooms of people meeting people like John Foster Dulles, Anthony Eden, others Harry Truman, who were crafting some of these discussions and what eventually led to the United Nations. But we're at a point in international relations today where the world seems to be in a great degree of flux. I mean, I think that's putting it very mildly. Every day, it appears, we have events in the news that we would not have thought or been able to anticipate so clearly, even a few weeks, let alone a few months or years ago. But we have a really fabulous panel here to discuss this over the next 45 minutes or so. They've already been introduced. And I think we should start just with the context that this really has been, 2024 really has been a year of elections. And if you take general elections at the national level, there have been elections in amongst other places: Mexico, India, Indonesia, Japan, Pakistan, Taiwan, the European Union, France, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and of course, one very big one this November. So with that, let me start with the Lieutenant Governor of California. We're very privileged that you've taken the time to join us here, given your busy schedule. Maybe start with the idea that, you know, we have November's election results. The Republican Party will, for the foreseeable future, be in the White House, and at least for the next 2 years in both houses of Congress. So given Republican control, how does a state like California, which is one of the world's, on its own, the state of California is one of the world's largest economies, how do you see major policy changes, particularly with respect to technology or clean energy? How do you see Sacramento taking a lead in this?
Well, first, let me say thank you very much for having me here with this incredibly distinguished panel. And welcome to everyone who is here from outside of California or outside of the country. Yes, I could not agree with you more. It was a very consequential year for elections, and among all of them, nothing more consequential than the elections in the United States. Those of us in our party are doing a lot of looking back and analyzing and understanding what happened. But for the purposes of this conversation, it's, of course, another important part of what we are all thinking about is what happens next. And I think it's different this time than it was 8 years ago. We have 4 years under our belt of dealing with President Trump, and California had some very hard-fought battles last time. We fought in the courts to keep our emission standards control, which was very important for being able to reach our 2045 goals. And we also made substantial changes to our legal infrastructure and to our state constitution to protect women, women's reproductive freedom, immigrants, the LGBTQ community. So we're in a very different place. I think what's also different is that we have some experience and understanding that we have to be ready for anything that might come out of Washington particularly being California. But we also have to, I guess, while we're prepared for the worst, if you will, we also want to hope that we'll be able to deal with whatever comes our way, even if there are conflicts, but also be able to continue to advance the policies that are so incredibly important to California and truly make us who we are as a state. Those are both in the way that we view a democratic and free society, the way that we see personal liberty, the way that we see women's rights and the LGBTQ rights, et cetera. And that, of course, are incredible investments we've been making in this state that that are so deep, and allocations that billions and billions of dollars in tax credit programs and grant programs, such that we feel very strongly that the innovative community here will continue to pursue innovations in transitioning to a carbon-free energy future. And so I think that is what I would say is kind of where the thinking is right now. But I think there's a lot of sort of emotional swings that people are happening, trying to get our head around what comes next. But again, most importantly, what I always try to convey is that what is good for California is good for the country. And I am very hopeful, particularly because we won some very important congressional seats. This is just the last point. In California, we flipped some districts, so the margin in the House of Representatives is one of, if not the slimmest margin ever. And we're very hopeful that on a federal level, we'll be able to protect and advance our priorities in that way.
If I can just follow up, one area that a lot of the world looks to California for is tech policy in particular. This is such a hub of innovation, but you also are concerned about data privacy and other issues. What are some of the policy concerns that sort of, to put it bluntly, keep you and the governor up at night, when it comes to AI, automation, things like that?
Well, there are many things that can keep one up at night in that regard. Certainly, we passed some very important privacy laws here, modeled largely on what the EU did. But I think that in that whole kind of span and scope of the area of how to reasonably regulate new technologies such that our people are protected and our workers are protected and consumers are protected, all of that. I do think there's a lot of bipartisan interest in that. And so when we saw the TikTok bill that passed, that had bipartisan support. So again, I think that there are likely going to be differences between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, but it is still our hope that we can advance the kinds of protections that will be important for society without hindering innovation, because as we know, California is the birthplace of innovation, and we believe and are not afraid, I think, of the future.
Former Foreign Minister Carl Bildt, you belong to a country, Sweden, that is actually the United States' newest ally. Congratulations.
Together with Finland.
Together with Finland. I think it was a bit harder for you, thanks to Mr. Erdogan, to be ratified. Is that correct?
These things happen.
These things happen. But just in the context of Sweden being a new NATO country, new NATO ally for the US, and the fact that you have a new slate of leaders in Europe, in Brussels in particular, both in NATO and at the European Union, what does Europe think of Trump? How's Europe bracing for a Trump administration?
Well, we are waiting for January 20th and see what will happen. But of course, there are quite a number of questions that are hovering around. The transatlantic relationship is, of course, by trades in goods or services or investment or whatever, the by far largest relationship there is in the world overall. So we are somewhat, America first is okay, but if America first turns into America only, it becomes somewhat problematic. And we are perhaps particularly concerned with the trade issues and what will happen there. I mean, I understand that President-elect Trump loves tariffs. We Europeans, most of us, don't like tariffs. We think tariffs are taxes on something that is good, and that is a relationship between people. And what will happen there is, of course, something that is going to concern us. Europe is in terms of dependence upon foreign trade, we are number one in the world. The Chinese number two, the Americans fairly distinct number three. So we are more affected by what happens to the global economy and the sort of conditions for the global economy than others. So that's one thing that we are somewhat apprehensive about. Russia, Ukraine, obviously, because that concerns our security, and not sort of distant security, very nearby security in our case. But we hope for the best.
If I can just follow up on the last point, how concerned are you about talk that Trump will resolve the conflict in some way, shape, or form, and potentially...
Well, it's going to happen in 24 hours.
Yes. He promised 24 hours, yeah.
We are told. I mean, everyone wants the conflict to be resolved. The question is how and on what terms. Is it going to be resolved on the terms of Russia, that essentially want to get rid of Ukraine, or get control of Ukraine, or change the borders of Europe? Or is it going to resolve on sort of Ukrainian terms, that is preserving the sovereignty, independence, and hopefully territorial integrity of Ukraine? These things are important for Ukraine, needless to say, but it impacts the security of at least all of Europe. And if it goes in the wrong way, it's got to be sort of something that it could be seen as an encouragement, or at least sort of green light towards others. Mr. Putin might not be the only one harboring ambitions of this sort on the globe. There are others who might feel inspired and do similar things if this goes wrong. So it's a huge issue, needless to say.
Marise Payne, you've been Foreign Minister and Defense Minister of Australia. Another sort of legacy of the Biden administration was, although Australia has been one of the oldest American allies, is AUKUS, which has really been a consolidation of the US-Australia alliance along with the UK. How do you see the impact of a Trump administration from Australia's vantage point?
Well, I think it's worth noting that governments in all three AUKUS countries have now changed since the AUKUS arrangement was announced in September of 2021. So change of government in my own country, Sir Keir Starmer elected in the UK, and now a change of government here. And thus far, it has continued its development. It's an enormous undertaking on any interpretation for Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarine capability. But for the United States to have agreed to share is obviously a significant threshold that has been crossed. Knowing the experiences we had through the first administration, and I was Foreign Minister and Defence Minister during that time, I think that we're in a good position if the President chooses to look at the balance sheet. It's very much in the United States' favour, and that's obviously a plus from his perspective. And Australia is making a very significant contribution financially to AUKUS itself, and obviously, as you say, the century of mateship, 100 years of mateship, which we refer to in terms of the Australia-US alliance, underpins all of that. So I'm confident. It might not appear at first blush as something that perhaps the President would have done himself, but now that it is well underway and in place, I'm confident it will continue. It's important for the region. It's important for the Indo-Pacific, and it's something that even my party from opposition, for example, would be continuing to advocate for very strongly.
It's interesting that from all three of you, I seem to get a sense of wait and see rather than, which is interesting. If I can turn to Maeda-san, obviously the U.S.-Japan alliance is important, but I want to ask you a little bit about Japan, which just underwent an election of its own, a somewhat surprising result. I would ask you about two countries. One is your own country of Japan. Where do you see Japan's and its leadership going from here? I think a lot of us recall that 8 years ago, it was Prime Minister Abe that really advocated in Washington and with President Trump on the free and open Indo-Pacific and the Quad and many other initiatives that the Trump administration took on. But secondly, I also want to ask you about another country, a neighboring country, South Korea, a country we would not have expected to be thinking about in terms of geopolitical turmoil, and yet we saw the imposition of martial law and a great deal of political uncertainty there, and you've been very involved in engagement between Japan and Korea. So where do you see Japan and Korea going over the next year?
Okay, well, I was a special advisor to the cabinet for almost 14 years. Two different parties from DPJ era since 2010, and now the LDP and coalition in 2024, so that's 14 years. I served as from Prime Minister Kan, Prime Minister Noda, Prime Minister Abe, Prime Minister Suga, Prime Minister Kishida. Most recently, I was in charge of, under Prime Minister Kishida, in charge of energy transition. So that I'm now trying to secure that the continuity of the policy, because no matter who is get elected the Prime Minister of Japan, that our agenda is the same. So that, for example, that in 2007, first Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he delivered a speech in the Indian Parliament named the Conference of Two Seas. It's a basic notion of free and open Indo-Pacific. So that the partner, the second Prime Minister, second term of Prime Minister Abe, his counterpart, the Prime Minister, President Obama and President Trump. So he tried to keep the continuity regardless of the change from the Democrat to Republican. I mean, many of the agenda has been started from Trump 1.0, like a free and open Pacific, the Quad, and also that Blue Dot Network. Those are all of the issues that started from Trump era. But now President Biden very strongly promoted this. Because of this, now our relation between 4 countries and Quad, Japan, United States, Australia, India is very much focused on this. So therefore, that I have to say that now Prime Minister Ishiba, I was, by the way, stepped down from this position. So, however, that I still continue to serve in the same agendas of the energy transition. So that even if the President Trump will get returned to the White House, so this trend of the carbon neutrality remained same. It's my view. So that's so he is not able to stop this. And also what happened to Japan, simply that the election of, most recent election of Lower House, that the Prime Minister Ishiba is now a minority government. So he, big loss because of a scandal of the party's money. So that's the so-called the slush fund issue. But this is not a fully persuaded general public. Therefore, general public is now really upset that, therefore, that LDP and its coalition partner, Communist Party, significantly lose the seat of Lower House. Next year, by the way. Next year, we have the upper house election in September. So that if now the upper house is less likely to lose the majority for coalition, but there's some chance. So that this is a big disaster if it happens in the upper house election in September. So I hope not it's happened. And Korea, very quickly, that Korea is a partner. Actually, in November last year, on the margin of the APEC meeting in San Francisco, I was requested by Deputy Secretary of State now in the White House, then Carl Campbell, to make fence mending between Japan and South Korea. Therefore, that I flew to Seoul 1 month before that happened. And then I had a meeting with an advisor to President Yoon Suk-yeol. And then I explained to that importance of that relationship building between Japan and ROK. And I'm now focused on the partnership between Japan and ROK on hydrogen ammonia. Because of many past eras that with many rivals and kind of competition between Japanese businesses and Korean businesses. So some of the government bureaucracies now do not trust that ROK. Therefore, that's why I focus on new agenda, which is hydrogen ammonia. And then Prime Minister Kishida, they said to President Yoon, building up new relationship on a partnership on Japan and ROK on hydrogen ammonia. So cover the full supply chain of hydrogen ammonia from United States and Europe, and then full supply chain to Middle East, Australia, whatever. So that's a very good story. And Prime Minister Kishida and President Yoon had some talk moderated by a former Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, in Stanford University. And then I inserted the paper to Prime Minister Kishida. He read the text I prepared, and then the Prime Minister Yoon accepted full of this. Therefore, that this continue to this. Therefore, that the Korea situation is also very disastrous. Actually, there's some possibilities of allegation of insurrection for the now current defense minister because of martial law attempt. And then I don't know the reason why that the President Yoon announced it's martial law, and then also they terminated only with 6 hours. I don't know exactly what happened, but Carl Campbell said this is a fatal mistake, he said in the publicly. So that's it's probably President Yoon is not able to be a position of presidents. Maybe the early election or presidential election may happen. So that's I'm worried about the opposition party leader, Mr. Lee. He is reportedly he is very close to China. So that he may change the course. So that's a big disaster. So that I try to secure that continuity of the policy. So therefore, that we have to engage with the businesses of Koreans, so the business to business, to secure that the trend.
Mm-hmm. So one of the big initiatives of the Biden administration, which was the Camp David agreements, the U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral, is now at risk given the developments in Korea. If I can turn to Ebtesam and Al-Ketbi, you are with the Emirates Policy Center, follow very closely developments in the Middle East. And again, a year ago, we were talking about the consequences of the October 7th attacks in Israel and the Gaza war, IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, and other major developments a year ago. But now, just over the past 12 months, we've had the extension of conflict into Lebanon. And then just a few days ago, very dramatic developments in Syria with Bashar al-Assad leaving the country. What do what are we to make of these dramatic developments in the Middle East from your point of view?
First, good evening for everybody. Happy to be with you. Well, look, we are living in what we call it strategic shocks. Started with Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon, now Syria. So, we are not prepared for it. And now you have the Levant, from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria. What happened in Syria, I think due to mainly the first reason, Iran has been weakened and Hezbollah has been weakened by the Israeli attacks. At the same time, I think there was a deal between Russian and Iranian and the Turks. That's why there was, when you see that the rebels, how they move fast, and the army was not even fighting against them. You cannot imagine this strong fighter. Yes, in fact, the Iranian were fighting for the Russian in Syria because the army was weak, but you could not expect that. Now what we are taking, the repercussion will be on Jordan, on Lebanon, and you can go also to the Gulf. There is a vacuum. shows the Turks were very clever, how they designed it, how they moved with their intelligence, with their drones, helped those rebels to go. What's worrying me the day after, those are coming from Islamist group, used to be part of them with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Jolani, whom he now bringing his real name, Ashar, he's promising that he's not going to attack the minorities, the Christians, the Alawites, the others. But the guy who did all of that, I'm not sure that he will. I'm still skeptical about the power sharing with others, with other opposition. We will see. But, and the Turks, they are willing also to give some of share for others because they did this all. What is worrying me, the vacuum still now, and of course the Israeli are also eating parts of Syria. This is Netanyahu who goes from war to another. Syria still, you cannot say it is settled. There are many scenarios coming. The worst scenario, that is the civil war between Syrian minorities, and there is also the Kurds, whom Turkey is not accepting them being there, and that they are cooperating. The Turks saying cooperating with the PKK. So there are a lot of things. We are in the Gulf worrying of those fanatic group that it might encourage other Al-Qaeda group, Islamist, in somewhere else. So there are many things you can. This is Panadora box. We have seen Iraq, what happened. Yes. Now this is without civil society. Same Iraqi scenario. No civil society can take or fill that vacuum. Okay, so it's filled by non-state actors, other external groups, and the four team of army, they call it, that was fighting, disappeared once, and with their weapon, and you don't know where they are going. And it might goes to Latakia, being insurgency there. Would Iran give up what happened? Still, we don't know.
So a messy situation overall. Discussions like this on geopolitics can be quite depressing. So one quick round of questions for all of you, the same question for everyone. What is one thing over the next year that gives you grounds for some optimism, or is a bright spot in the international environment? Maybe I feel like you have a ready answer there, but maybe give everyone else a second to think about it before we turn it over to audience questions.
No, that's of course the obvious things to say when you're in California. But the development of science and technology is mind-bogglingly promising. There are the obvious dangers and challenges and whatever. But the possibilities with AI and quantum and all of this to transform mankind, and the word for the better, is bigger than it's been for a very, very long time. Dangers, but promise.
Actually, about 5 years ago, I remember having a conversation with someone named Marcos Kounalakis, who is related to somebody on this panel, who was explaining to me some of the things that Google was doing at the time. And I was really skeptical, but we've just seen some of the developments in the past few days that have really been potentially transformative. Maybe Marise, Payne, and then we can go down the panel.
Well, I'd like to think that it's the potential for new generations of leaders to exploit those technologies and opportunities and see new ways to participate in the world. I think generational change is essential. I'm slightly biased in favour of fabulous women taking up generational change, but I do think that Carl is, Carl is right. That potential for such transformative application of technology will really open people's eyes to the art of the possible in leadership in a way that is throwing out the old typical ways which people like us have come through into a new world.
Lieutenant Governor?
I'm trying really hard.
I had to riff off Carl, right? So
I
know
was
what you mean.
actually going to just honestly tear off of what you just said, because I really do think what makes me optimistic is that I always have faith in the ability of our people, certainly my faith in Californians, but my faith in Americans, my faith in people everywhere, that we won't accept the status quo when the status quo is chaos, discord, war, famine, disruption, all of these things. That, in fact, we always within us have the ability to try to solve the problems that are in front of us, bring people together. It takes courage, and I will never give up. Madeleine Albright was a mentor of mine. She also used to come to San Francisco all the time because her daughter and her kids were here. And Madeleine had this wonderful line. She said, she's an optimist who worries a lot. And there's a lot to worry about right now, but there's just no choice but to keep the faith. My deep concerns, and I was 24/7 on the campaign trail for my friend Kamala Harris, our former AG, former senator from California, and when I said I believed that it was the most important election for us and for the world, and that we had to win it, I meant it. Well, we know what happened. We know it was a clear and decisive outcome, and now it's going to be day by day, taking this of what comes at us, and if the Trump administration thinks that they can resolve the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, I think, as Carl, you said that very well, we all want it. Of course, we're all going to be watching very carefully what the terms are of all these things that happen. And I also want to say one thing, just because we're so fortunate to have you here, Mr. Maeda, and we've spent so much time together, and certainly because so many of you are here, with the ORF and the Racina dialogues and all the wonderful work that ORF does, that I do have hope in the strength of the relationship between our subnational government and our economy here in California with Japan, with Australia, with Europe, with India, which we always hope is stronger, and always hope that you buy as many of our tree nuts, our almonds, and our walnuts as you possibly can consume, and certainly to the degree that those relationships can exist with the Middle East. But that gives me hope as well. And it's always, again, those person-to-person relationships and the human spirit, which always keeps going forward.
Ebtesam, what?
Well, look, I'm coming from the Gulf, from my country, UAE. We always look to the future, although we are surrounded by many fires around us, but we're always looking for how we transfer our economy and totally our life with AI. Every day you have a new UAE, new idea, new conference, So we are optimistic in that part of the world. We are surrounded by that, but we are believer that this region can change what is around.
Maeda-san.
Yes, I'm glad to be optimistic about the climate change and the carbon neutrality agenda. Even the superpower of the United States, President Trump, is not able to stop this movement. It's not possible. And second, I have one concern that since June of this year, I met many leaders of Asia, especially ASEAN. I met President of the Philippines, Fernando Marcos Jr., and also Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto, and also Laopedia President of Party leaders Tun Lung, and Prime Minister of Thailand Seta, and also Prime Minister of Malaysia Anwar, and also that the President of Singapore Tharman. Also, I met those group of people for these 6 months, and they orchestrated that. Now they're very concerned about the Trump administration may put this ASEAN in particular issue as a secondary issue and they put the back burner. That's very some likely. So that I try to keep this agenda on a front line, especially that's what's likely to happen in Taiwan Strait. Therefore, this is very important. So that, and also the result of the promotion of the partnership among the Indo-Pacific by the President Biden. Now, the Japanese businesses changed the course quite a bit. Now, up to 2018, China is a top in the seat of the foreign direct investment in Japan. But now, India is the most prominent country, and also that more actual foreign direct investment are going, U.S. is number one right now. In terms of share of foreign direct investment in the U.S., Japan is now back to the first seat. So this is exactly what happened because of the President Biden's policy to support partnership among the Indo-Pacific. So that I hope that this policy will not discontinue.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions. So we have a few mics. If you could raise your hands, I can call on people. Sorry. Jeff, yeah, over here. And there's a mic coming over to you. And if... Yeah. Oh.
No, it's a quick question to Marise and maybe... by the way, Carl, I thought I would never say this, but you are the most optimistic person on the panel. And that's a distinction this evening. But anyway, Minister Payne, you mentioned that all the 3 AUKUS partners have had change of governments. Any relationship with the deal itself? But on a more serious note, is it time to rethink AUKUS to make it more real by perhaps bringing in a few more countries? And there have been some conversations that is it time to have an AUKUS plus arrangement?
JAUKUS.
Sorry?
One of them is JAUKUS, added Japan.
Japan joining in, right? But no, my question to you is that a possibility under Trump to give AUKUS more ambition, since Trump was perhaps the man who revived the Accord?
Indeed. I don't think for Pillar 1, I don't think that's possible, and I don't think any of the partners would advocate that for Pillar 1. But there are certainly live discussions, particularly amongst those who would like to participate, and Japan is one, Korea is another, New Zealand is another, Canada is a fourth, in relation to Pillar 2, so the AI, quantum computing, hypersonics, undersea capability, those aspects. And I think that's a live discussion. It's not something which is necessarily being initiated by AUKUS partners, but there are a few countries putting their hands up to say we would like to be part of this process. And there's a lot of compelling reasons why you would look at that, including European partners, in terms of exactly the sorts of innovation that Carl talked about that are going to transform defence technologies as well. And that is, certainly an option for those discussions. I don't think it's being advocated, though, as a live issue at the moment. There's a lot of focus on progressing the submarine capability, obviously, and Pillar 2 is something I'm doing some work on, for example, in my role with the Hoover Institution, and I know it's being done in other think tanks as well. Maybe ORF wants to have a conversation.
Yeah, here, go ahead, please.
Well, thanks. What a terrific panel. I'm curious, day 1 of the Trump presidency is going to be a busy day. He's probably going to pull out of the Paris Agreement. He's going to do all kinds of other horrible things. He'll announce tariffs. It'll be very clear. I'm just curious, maybe this question is for Carl. What should the rest of the world do on day 2 to demonstrate stability?
Well, I'll take a long breath. What should we do? On the trade side, to take that one, because I do think that is very important. I mean, that's important for us Europeans, needless to say, but it's very important to take this popular term, the global south. What is happening, if you look at the figures on the global south and global economy, it is the Chinese are taking over the trading relationship of the world. I will take the figures if I remember them rightly. China is the #1 trading partner for 120 countries around the world. Europe is 80, US is 20, roughly of that order. If US goes trade or tariffs, those figures will shift even more in the Chinese direction. And politics will follow. Not immediately, but over time it does. So what can we do, Europeans in this particular case? Well, we can, of course, reinforce our open trading regimes of different sorts. We've just sort of concluded, the European Union has just concluded the political parts of the enormous agreement with Mercosur. That's the biggest one in the world, 800 million people. Free trade and partnership and whatever. That's important for us and for Argentinians and Brazilians, but it also sends the signals of trying to preserve as much as we can of an open trading relationship in the world, because otherwise others will take over. And I think I indicated roughly who the others are.
Maybe one question in the back, if there's... yes, over there. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, ORF, first of all, for hosting us here. This is a wonderful evening, and I thank you to the organizers, the host, for having us here. My question is to the Lieutenant Governor of California. You briefly brought up working with the Kamala Harris campaign. What are the lessons learned? Has there been any introspection within the Democratic Party, looking at the nature of the two contestants in these elections, which we've hardly recovered, or maybe we've, moved on. It's such a shock, if you will. But the disparity between the two contenders was black and white, literally. One being, with all the lawfare against, and one was Attorney General, et cetera. We know a career law prosecutor official. Has there been any introspection in the Democratic Party? And what is it? If yes, if no, what is it?
So, absolutely. There is a lot of introspection and a lot of conversations happening about what went wrong. I can tell you from my perspective as someone who was very active, very involved, saw a lot, went to different states, campaigned door to door in Nevada and Pennsylvania, and of course here in California. I think there was nothing that was more difficult for her and for the Biden administration to overcome than inflation. The impact on people's lives of the increase in the cost of goods before COVID and after COVID was enormous. More than 20% inflation, altogether aggregated over those years, after many years of things not really going up very much year on year. And even though statistically it looked like wages were keeping up, the lived experience that people were having was something very, very different. You couldn't go to the favorite restaurant you would go to every year on your birthday anymore. You couldn't get the thing at Starbucks that you liked to get because you had to get something cheaper because the numbers were so significant. And of course, for those who were barely living with their head above water, things were extremely difficult. And I think that ultimately was why the American people could overlook all of the things that you just said. And I think that it's also, I look back and the first thing that caused, and again, my experience here in leading in California, the first thing that caused prices to start surging were supply chain disruptions because of COVID. The second thing were the tariffs, which had a huge impact on us here in California. And this idea that Trump was saying they're going to pay the tariffs. No, consumers were paying the costs of those tariffs. And most people in this country, even after the campaign, have absolutely no idea. And so the fact that the Biden administration was touting its economic policies while not recognizing that people were still swallowing the incredible increase in the cost of living nationwide, to me, that's the reason. Now, they weaponized a whole bunch of other things very effectively, and I will tell you, as someone who is very close to the LGBTQ community, weaponizing the struggles of trans people, to me, was just unforgivable, particularly trans children. But that's all the cutthroat politics of it. To me, the real lesson learned is that the Democratic Party simply needs to be more in touch with everyday people, and in particular, letting go of this notion that we're going to talk about each individual group and talk a little bit more broadly about our communities and what's going on in our communities, whether it's public safety, whether it's the challenges of small businesses to be able to get ahead. So I think that there are definitely lessons learned, but I tell you, I was United States ambassador to Hungary. As a matter of fact, I worked very closely with Karl's protege. I hope that's okay Karin Olafsdotter, who is just an exceptional diplomat. But when Karin and I were there, Viktor Orban came into power, and it was a velvet revolution of sorts. I mean, he was able to consolidate enormous power without putting political prisoners in jail, without putting journalists in jail, right? Without brute force, but rather through this chipping away at checks and balances and taking control of the independent institutions of democracy. But he did it with the buy-in of the people by solving some of those dinner table problems that they were experiencing, and of course other things, relying on supranationalism and scapegoating others. But as a party, we have a lot of work to do, because they come back with experience and with 4 years and with what I think is true, which is the intention of never losing power again. So we have our work definitely cut out for us. But I will say this: if they do many of the things that Donald Trump has promised, they will be very, very vulnerable, because mass deportations, what he said the other day, that if there are parents with children who are U.S. citizens, that he'll deport the whole family. You can't deport U.S. citizens. If he follows through, and tariffs, which will drive prices up even more, I think that they will be extremely vulnerable. We have elections in 2 years. We have elections in 4 years, and this is not over. We are not Hungary. We are the United States of America.
Thank you. On that note, please join me in thanking the panel for a very candid, very wide-ranging discussion. One of the really nice things about working at ORF is being able to do discussions like this, which are so wide-ranging, covering everything from Northeast Asia to the Middle East, from Europe to the South Pacific to the Americas, and in a discussion such as this. So it really is enriching. May I turn it over to Sharon?
And at this time, I'd like to invite Sanjoy Joshi, who's the chair of the board of directors for ORF America, to deliver closing remarks.
Good evening, everybody. My job is to give the closing remarks on a panel which was actually non-parade. You kind of saw the expertise in the room with all the panelists sitting here and giving their very free and frank views on what the state of the flux, which has been described by all of them, this uncertainty, this complete, this borderline chaos which we feel is upon the world. And at the end of it, we start saying, okay, we are all optimists, we are doubting optimists. And what does it mean to be a doubting optimist? And that is, what I'll really conclude with. I think that is a real key takeaway messages which this excellent panel discussion left behind for all of us. Yes, it's said that we live in uncertain times. There's a lot of flux, there's a lot of change happening. But the fact is that this entire discussion was about the era of elections, about democracies, how democracies function, what democracies do. Democracies are about flux. Democracy is about change. And democracies are the kinds of governance systems which are best equipped both to create flux and then to handle the outcome of that flux. Now look back at it. When were we not in flux? Universal suffragette, voting rights for women. Every time democracy disrupted society, it challenged norms right through the centuries. It changed the kind of governance systems. It changed how power was wielded, how power was exercised. And it did it to the will of the people. And what are people? People are not predictable. We say we live in uncertain times. We live in uncertain times primarily because, yes, human beings are about handling uncertainty and change. That is what we are. No, we are not human beings are not the consumers targeted by Netflix and Spotify. They're not predictable. We can keep on building AI models to predict human behavior. We always fail. And every time we've had elections, whether in the United States of America, whether we have them in India, in truly functioning democracies, you will see from time to time that every once in a while, people love pulling their representatives down, rubbing their noses in the mud, and making them smell the grass. That is how democracies learn. That is how democracies actually learn how to handle change and move forward in this time. And this is also an example of how ORF functions. Democracy is about doubt, about not being sure, in spite of all the information, that we can never be sure of what lies ahead. Yes, but we need to find a way out to handle what is going to be thrown our way in the next few years. Samir told you about all the work that ORF is doing. How did ORF begin? No, ORF began in the early 90s. And for many of you who don't know the story, I'll repeat this. ORF began in the 1990s. It was a time of extreme polarization and flux in India. The country was going bankrupt. It did not have enough money to pay for even a month of imports it was making. And at that point of time, the challenge was, Indians are argumentative, Indians are always fractious. They don't agree with anything their best neighbor says. So at that point of time, the whole idea was to create a kind of institution which could get these very diverse people who would never see eye to eye on anything to come together, sit together, and try and create a minimum agenda, a consensus which could move them to reform, somewhere where they could see each other's point of view and understand the major issues which affected the people who voted, people whose lives mattered, and then build a common consensus. That is how ORF was formed. Now, today, when we start looking at the world around us, I think what began in the 90s is something which ORF is attempting to do globally through its various centers. We keep saying we work with ideas, we don't work with ideologies. We want to bring all kinds of people into a room. We want to actually create conversations between different kinds of people to find a way forward. Because that is where we are headed. We are not looking back at the past. We're not looking at where we come from. We want to look ahead and see where we are going to be moving ahead in the next few years. So I thank you all for reposing faith in us and joining us as being part of this group, this family of ORF which we're trying to create globally. I really thank each and every one of you for being here and being a part of this conversation. Next time, we shall meet again. Till then, good luck.
Thank you once again to all of our speakers, to all of our partners, friends, to the community of supporters, and to all of you for spending a few hours with us this evening.